Hey everyone, welcome to Dark Ascent. I'm Matthew, and today I'll examine the K2 climb where the mountain had already made its decision, and this climber never saw it coming. An unearned Everest summit fed an arrogance that convinced her the world's deadliest peak could be managed, and she treated a death zone like a photo shoot. I gotta warn you, the aftermath of this expedition will absolutely shock you. It was June 28th, 2017, and K2 Base Camp sat at 16,400 feet on the Godwin-Austen Glacier, a sprawl of weathered tents and stacked supply barrels spread across gray moraine. The air temperature hovered around 32 degrees Fahrenheit in the midday sun, though a persistent wind from the south cut through layers and carried fine grit into every seam and zipper. Occasional deep shifting sounds rose from the glacier beneath the camp. Above it all, K2 rose in a geometry that photographs never adequately captured. 28,251 feet of limestone, granite, and hanging ice that steepened the higher you looked. The upper pyramid disappearing into a plume of wind-driven snow that streamed eastward like a white flag. The camp was small by Himalayan standards. Where Everest Base Camp resembled a crowded village, K2's camp held perhaps 80 people, total across 6 expedition teams. There were no bakeries, no barrel saunas, no satellite internet cafes. Helicopter rescue was extremely limited, rarely possible above the lower camps. The nearest hospital was in Skardu, a multi-day trek to Eskol, followed by a rough vehicle journey. Every serious decision made above this camp carried a weight that Everest did not impose. Among the climbers staged at base camp was Darcy Merritt, a 32-year-old from Scottsdale, Arizona. She had arrived 10 days earlier after the grueling approach trek from Eskol, 70 miles across the Baltoro Glacier, through terrain that filtered out anyone unprepared for sustained discomfort. Darcy had made the trek without incident, though she was consistently among the last to reach each camp, a pattern her social media posts reframed as savoring the journey rather than struggling with the pace. Darcy's climbing career had begun 4 years earlier with a guided ascent of Kilimanjaro that she described as transformative. Within 2 years, she added Elbrus and a trek to Everest Base Camp. Her trajectory accelerated in 2016 when she summited Everest via the Southeast Ridge on a premium guided expedition that cost north of $65,000. The climb had been fully supported, fixed ropes the entire route, Sherpas managing every oxygen swap, camps pre-stocked, and a guide-to-client ratio that left little to individual decision-making. She reached the summit at 1:50 p.m., well past standard turnaround time. Her guides had made the controversial call to let her continue past the turnaround time rather than turn back a paying client within sight of the top. She summited, descended safely with heavy Sherpa assistance, and returned home with photographs that launched a new chapter of her life. And here's the thing that kept circling in my head while I was putting this together: that Everest summit wasn't a green light. It was a warning sign that got repackaged as a credential. Within months, Darcy had repositioned her personal brand around mountaineering. Her background was in digital marketing, 6 years managing social campaigns for lifestyle brands before pivoting to freelance consulting that allowed travel flexibility. She understood audience building intuitively, and her Everest content performed well. The posts framed her as someone who had conquered fear and earned a place among serious climbers. A mid-tier outdoor gear company offered partial funding and equipment for her next expedition in exchange for content deliverables. She chose K2. The decision alarmed people who understood the difference. Everest via the Southeast Ridge, with full support, was a logistical challenge requiring endurance and the ability to follow instructions. K2 via the Abruzzi Spur demanded genuine climbing skill, movement on steep mixed rock and ice, often on fixed lines but requiring real technical ability, with exposure where a slip meant a fall measured in thousands of feet. Historically, K2 had one of the highest fatality rates of any 8,000-meter peak, roughly 1 death for every 4 to 5 summits in earlier decades. Friends urged her to attempt another peak first. Cho Oyu or Manaslu, mountains that bridged the gap between Everest's guided infrastructure and K2's demands. Darcy thanked them for their concern and continued planning. I've spent enough time with K2 stories at this point to know that the gap between what Everest requires and what K2 demands is not a step. It's a cliff, and Darcy was about to walk off it. Her expedition company assigned 2 Nepali high-altitude climbing Sherpas to support her. Furba Thendu was 38 years old, a veteran of 3 K2 summits, 4 Everest summits, and a sense of Lhasa, Makalu, and Broad Peak. He had worked in high-altitude guiding for 16 years, developing a reputation for conservative judgment and quiet authority. This was his planned final expedition season. He and his wife had spent 3 years building a small trekking lodge in the Khumbu Valley, and the K2 contract would fund the final construction phase. He intended to be home by September, finished with the work that had defined his adult life. Kanchanuru was 26, strong and fast, with 2 8,000-meter summits, Broad Peak and Manaslu, and a growing reputation as one of the most capable young high-altitude workers in the industry. He was the eldest of 4 siblings, and his guiding income funded his 2 younger brothers' schooling in Kathmandu and his sister's nursing program. The math of his family's future ran directly through his ability to work at extreme altitude. He looked up to Furba, studied his decision-making, and modeled his own approach on the older guide's discipline. Both men recognized early that Darcy moved poorly on technical terrain. Over the 3 weeks that followed their arrival, the expedition cycled through acclimatization rotations, climbing higher, retreating lower, letting the body adapt. During the first rotation through the Abruzzi Spur's lower sections, she struggled on House's Chimney, a near vertical rock pitch at roughly 21,000 feet that required confident movement on mixed rock and the ice. Furba short-roped her through the most difficult sections, essentially climbing for 2 while she managed basic crampon placements. The Black Pyramid above, a broken band of steep rock laced with ice and fixed ropes between 22,000 and 23,000 feet, exposed the gap further. She arrived at Camp 2, each rotation well behind other climbers, her pace reflecting not just fitness limitations, but a fundamental unfamiliarity with the movement patterns that technical alpine terrain demanded. On the second rotation, at the base of a steep pitch on the Black Pyramid, she unclipped her pack and held it toward Kancha without a word, just extended it as if he were a bellhop. He was already carrying 60 pounds of expedition gear. He took the pack and said nothing. Furba raised his concerns privately with the expedition leader during a rest day at base camp. The conversation was honest but constrained. The leader acknowledged that Darcy was among the weaker climbers on the permit, but the company's seasonal finances depended on client retention. Pulling a paying client required a medical justification or a clear safety emergency, not a subjective assessment of ability. The leader told Furba to continue monitoring and to make the call on summit day if conditions warranted. The responsibility was transferred downward, as it often was. That moment right there is one I keep running into. The guide raises the flag, the system folds it back up, and the person least qualified to assess the risk ends up deciding for everyone. What frustrated Furba and Concha more than her climbing was the disconnect between her actual performance and the version she broadcast. At Camp 2, during a rest afternoon at 21,300 feet, Darcy asked Furba to reclimb a short section of fixed rope so she could film him from above for content she was producing. Furba declined, visibly uncomfortable but polite. The request treated a working climb as a production set. She was annoyed, but didn't push it. The interaction circulated among other Sherpas and high-altitude workers at the camp, adding to a quiet consensus that Darcy did not understand where she was. Her posts from the acclimatization rotations told a different story. Photos at Camp 2 with the upper Abruzzi visible behind her, captioned with language about pushing limits and earning the right to stand in places most people only see in photographs. No mention of the short roping, the last place arrivals, or the Sherpas whose skill compensated for her deficits. I went through posts like these while researching the story, and what always gets me is the comment sections. Hundreds of people reinforcing a version of events that the mountain was about to correct in the worst possible way. The summit window opened in mid-July. Weather forecasts showed a narrow period of reduced wind and stable conditions, perhaps 48 hours before the jet stream reasserted itself. The expedition leader briefed all clients on the turnaround protocol. If you have not reached the summit by 2 p.m., you turn around regardless of position. No exceptions. The protocol existed because late summits on K2 meant descending the bottleneck and deteriorating afternoon conditions. When solar warming destabilized the hanging Serac, Darcy nodded and agreed. Everyone always agreed. They departed Camp 4 at 12:15 a.m. on July 22nd, joining a line of headlamps ascending toward the bottleneck. The cold was brutal, minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit before wind chill, and the darkness reduced the world to the small cone of each climber's headlamp and the rasping of crampons on hard snow. Darcy was slow from the first steps. Other teams passed her steadily, moving with the mechanical efficiency of people who understood that speed on K2 was not ambition, it was survival. By the time she reached the base of the bottleneck at approximately 26,200 feet, she was already behind schedule. The bottleneck, a steep couloir of blue ice, sitting directly beneath a massive hanging serac that shed ice unpredictably. Every minute in the gully increased exposure to collapse. The protocol was simple: move through as fast as possible. Do not stop. Approximately halfway up the bottleneck, Darcy stopped climbing. She unclipped one hand from her ascender, braced her stance awkwardly on the steep ice, and pulled her phone from an inner pocket. She adjusted her goggles onto her forehead, turned her body to frame the serac behind her, and took photographs. She checked the screen, repositioned, and took more. The stop lasted just over a minute. In any other context, a minute was nothing. In the bottleneck, beneath a serac that could release without warning, a minute was obscene. Furba, clipped to the rope directly behind her, told her to keep moving. She waved him off without turning around. Climbers below were forced to stop on the fixed line. Two attempted to edge past her, shifting their weight onto the rope in ways that transmitted instability to everyone clipped in, above and below. Concha, positioned higher, kept his eyes on the serac. The ice above was silent, but silence on K2 meant nothing. Darcy finally pocketed the phone, pulled her goggles back down, reclipped her ascender, and resumed climbing. The moment passed. The damage to her timeline did not. I need you to understand what just happened. She is standing on steep ice, directly beneath a serac that has killed dozens of people, and she's checking the framing on a photo. That image has not left me since I started this one. Quick reminder, if stories like this hold your attention, consider subscribing. These mountains carry more history than most people realize. Now let's get back to the mountain. She cleared the bottleneck and reached the traverse, a long, exposed crossing of steep, mixed terrain above the serac. Her pace deteriorated further. Her foot placements grew imprecise, crampons scraping against rock without finding clean purchase. Her body swaying on the rope in ways that suggested her coordination was beginning to erode. Furba keyed his radio. The transmission was broken, static, clipped fragments, the signal bouncing off rock and ice. The response came through in pieces, but the instruction was clear enough: turn her around. Furba moved alongside Darcy on the traverse and told her they needed to descend. She was past turnaround time. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply did not stop. She kept moving upward, slowly, one mechanical step after another, eyes fixed on the snow ahead. Just a little further. She didn't look at him. She didn't engage with the information. She just kept climbing. That quiet refusal is something I've come across in nearly every story like this. No confrontation, just a person who treats every warning like background noise. It's harder to counter than outright defiance, and far more lethal. Concha looked to Furba. If he left her, alone above the bottleneck, on terrain this exposed, she would die before nightfall. If he stayed, he might still get her to the summit and back down while daylight held. The first option was certain death. The second was a wager against time that was already losing. He stayed with her, the wrong call made for the right reason. I've gone back and forth on this moment more than any other in this story. Furba made the call that most of us would have made. You don't leave someone alone to die if there's any chance left. But K2 does not grade on intention. Darcy Merritt reached the summit of K2 at approximately 2:30 p.m. on July 22nd, 2017. She stood at 28,251 feet, 30 minutes past the turnaround time that every member of the expedition had agreed to respect. The Karakoram spread in every direction, peaks breaking through cloud layers like islands in a white sea. She took photographs. She posed. Furba checked their remaining oxygen, limited cylinders, running at roughly 2 liters per minute, which gave them a hard limit measured in hours, not comfort. The math had been deteriorating since the bottleneck. Now it was openly hostile. Every minute she spent on the summit subtracted directly from the margin that would keep them alive during the descent. He told her they needed to leave immediately. She took a few more shots, then finally turned downward. 30 minutes past turnaround on K2, oxygen burning down by the minute, and she's still posing for content. I had to go back through the timeline on this section twice because I kept hoping I'd gotten it wrong. The descent began in controlled deterioration. The traverse, which had been slow on the way up, became treacherous on the return. Afternoon sun had softened what had been firm footing into unreliable crust. Darcy's coordination was visibly worse, feet misplacing on holds, her body swaying against the fixed rope, crampons catching on rock rather than biting the ice. Furba and Concha bracketed her on the traverse, managing her rappel device at each anchor, clipping and unclipping her carabiners because her hands could no longer perform the sequence, guiding her boot placements onto footholds she could not find on her own. The bottleneck waited below. Down climbing it required controlled rappels on the fixed ropes, feeding rope through a descender while maintaining body position on steep ice. Darcy's hands fumbled with the device, her crampons scraped without biting. Furba positioned himself below her, controlling rope tension, while Kancha managed her clip-ins from above. They descended in short, exhausting increments, 10 feet, reset, 10 feet, reset, burning through time and energy at a rate none of them could sustain. Near the base of the bottleneck, at roughly 26,000 feet, the mountain made its own decision. There was no warning sound, just sudden movement above, a section of the hanging serac releasing in a partial collapse that sent ice chunks and debris raking across the couloir. The sound arrived after the movement, a deep cracking report followed by the hiss of accelerating debris. Concha shoved Darcy sideways on the fixed line, a reflexive motion executed while both were still clipped in. Ice fragments scattered across the slope. A chunk struck Concha's lower right leg and knee during the movement, a grinding collision that wrenched the joint sideways. He went down hard on the ice, still clipped to the rope. His right knee was already swelling beneath his shell pants, and he could not bear full weight. He was conscious, responsive, and cognitively sharp. He could move with support, but he could no longer function as a guide. And just like that, a 26-year-old's entire career is hanging by the same thread as the woman who put all three of them in this position. That's the part of these stories I can never make peace with. The cost always lands on the wrong person. Two problems now occupied the same section of mountain: an injured Sherpa who could still assist in his own rescue, and a client who was failing in ways that would not reverse at this altitude. Furba keyed his radio again. The transmission was brief. Their position, Concha's injury, the client's condition. Whether the full message reached base camp was uncertain. Other Sherpas and high-altitude workers began mobilizing from Camp 4, but the distance and terrain meant hours before they could arrive. Furba got Concha upright on his left leg, the injured. Right leg held slightly off the ice, the shaft of an ice axe serving as a crude crutch. Concha's face was tight with pain, but his eyes were focused. He understood the situation. He could hop, slide, and descend controlled sections with Furba managing the rope. It would be slow and agonizing, but it was possible. Darcy had stopped functioning. The deterioration was quiet. No screaming, no dramatic collapse. She sat down in the snow and did not respond appropriately to anything said to her. Furba told her to stand. She repeated the word, okay, but did not move. She looked at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. She asked whether they were going to Camp 2, a question that connected to nothing happening around her. Her speech was slow and slurred, her gaze unfocused. Textbook high altitude, cerebral edema. Her brain swelling from sustained exposure to extreme altitude. The cognitive architecture that governed decision-making and self-preservation dissolving in real time. Furba tried to lift her. He pulled her arm, spoke directly into her face, pointed downhill. She smiled at him vaguely and asked again about Camp 2. He braced her weight against his shoulder and attempted to get her to her feet. She did not resist, but she did not help. She was dead weight on a slope steep enough that one person could not move another without risking both their lives. The terrain between their position and Camp 4 required active participation from anyone descending it. She could not participate. The triage was not a decision in any meaningful sense. It was arithmetic. Kancha was injured but cognitively present. He could respond to instructions and manage his own clip-ins with one hand. Darcy could not assist in her own rescue. Carrying a non-responsive person down this terrain was physically impossible for one person. Staying longer meant all three die. There is no version of this decision that doesn't leave a permanent mark. I've read accounts from guides who made this exact call on other mountains, and not one of them describes it as a choice. They describe it as the moment the mountain took the last option away. Furba chose Kancha. He pulled the younger man's arm across his shoulders, took his weight on the downhill side, and began the slow descent toward Camp 4. He looked back once. Darcy was sitting exactly where he had left her, cross-legged in the snow, her head tilted slightly forward. She was not looking at the mountain, or the sky, or the route below. Her phone rested loosely in one hand. That image, her in the snow with a phone in her hand, while the man who tried to save her walks away. I don't think I'll get past that one. It might be the clearest frame of everything wrong with how this mountain gets treated now. They reached Camp 4 after dark, moving by headlamp across terrain that nearly killed them twice, Kancha's injured leg buckling on an ice step, Furba catching him before the fall became unrecoverable. A support team that had staged above Camp 4 met them 400 vertical feet above the tents and took over Kancha's weight. Furba sat down outside the tent and did not speak for a long time. Darcy Merritt did not survive the night. She remained above 25,000 feet, motionless, as temperatures dropped to -40 degrees Fahrenheit and wind scoured the face. Without movement, without supplemental oxygen, without shelter, her body lost heat faster than any biological process could replace it. Consciousness faded as the cold reached her core. She was 32 years old. Her body was located the following morning by a team ascending from Camp 4 to retrieve equipment. She was seated in the same position, legs folded, head tilted slightly forward, one hand loosely resting on her phone. The screen was dark. Recovery was deemed too dangerous given the technical terrain, the exposure of the location, and the active Serac hazard directly above. She remains on K2, as many of its victims do. The steepness, the altitude, and the risk to recovery teams making retrieval impossible. Kanchanuru was evacuated from base camp by military helicopter to Skardu, then transferred to Islamabad for emergency orthopedic surgery. His right patella was shattered, and the surrounding ligaments were severely torn. 3 surgeries over the following 8 months restored partial mobility, but he never regained the range of motion or the load-bearing capacity required for high-altitude guiding. He was 26 years old. The career that funded his siblings' educations, the work that defined his future, was over. He returned to the Khumbu Valley and took work managing a trekking agency's logistics office, a desk job that kept him connected to the mountains he could no longer climb. 26 years old. A desk job because he was standing next to the wrong client when the Serac decided to move. I keep running the numbers on stories like these, and they never come out fair. Furba Thendu finished the season and retired from expedition work as he had planned. He returned home, completed construction on the lodge, and opened it the following spring. Trekkers who stayed there in the later years described him as warm, knowledgeable, and generous with route advice. He kept a small collection of summit photographs in the lodge's common room. Broad Peak, Makalu, Everest. K2 was not among them. Those who knew him well, he never spoke about the 2017 season. The expedition company faced scrutiny for allowing a client insufficient technical skill onto K2's summit route. No formal sanctions followed. The climbing community debated the incident in forums and briefings, but the conclusions were familiar. Commercial pressure, client overconfidence, and turnaround times ignored. The same factors that had killed climbers before and would kill them again. Darcy's social media accounts remained active for 4 months after her death, the algorithm continuing to surface her content to followers who did not yet know she was gone. Her final post was a photograph from Camp 4, the upper pyramid of K2 visible behind her tent. The caption read, "Chasing what most people only dream of." Her family took the accounts down in November,